Welcome, guys, to the Won the Lot podcast. We're on episode 11, and this is Talking Devils, your leading independent Manchester United podcast. I'm Harry from Fan Owned United, as always, and this week joined by Stephen, who's a lifelong United fan and season ticket holder in the East End. I myself have had a season ticket close to 10 years and I'm in the Stretford End upper. If you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, also X now, our first podcast on the new rebranded X, feel free to put in some questions and comments. Always happy to answer those. And if you're watching the replay, do still feel free to drop any comments and any feedback. We will always get back to you. And please don't forget to like and subscribe on the podcast platforms such as Spotify and also on YouTube as well. First podcast for a couple of weeks. Back into the swing of things now as the season is well and truly underway. And the first place always to start is the previous game, which was Wolves a couple of evenings ago at Old Trafford. Kicked off our Premier League campaign with a 1-0 victory at Old Trafford. Steve, you were there. What was the atmosphere like in and around the ground, both kind of prior to the game and throughout the match?
It was all right, yeah. It always is quite a buzz of excitement around Old Trafford at the start of the season. Obviously, there's quite a lot to be excited about going into the game. We've got some new signings, two of which we're starting. So a real sense of intrigue to see how they performed, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Around the ground, milling, busy. There was a couple of protests against a couple of for a couple of different reasons. It was buzzing really. Wolves fans were in good voice as well, so the atmosphere was bouncing. Yeah.
It's I guess first game of the season. It's always a little bit edgy. Like it's a bit of an unknown as to how we'll come out the blocks. And I mean, from my perspective, I was pretty excited, looking forward to seeing how we'd set up. I think obviously with Mount in the middle, along with Onana, both of them making their Premier League debut. It was, really looking forward to how we'd play. But in all honesty, it was a bit of a disappointing performance if we were to break it down. I mean, looking at a few statistics from the match, surprisingly, the Wolves had 23 shots to our 15. We had 3 shots on target and they had 6. 51 to 49% possession in our favour, which isn't anything to sing and shout about from especially with us being at home. Diving straight into it, why do you think the performance wasn't as expected, and how do you think Wolves kind of had so many chances?
Well, first of all, I think that's probably the best they're going to perform all season. We actually faced them last season at a new manager bounce, like Lopetegui's first game in charge. So, as he left 6 games before the season, there was a lot of talk on X or on Twitter talking about a potential new manager bounce even before the season starts. And you're thinking, can there even be one when there's no games to have played have been played before? But yeah, I think they just wanted it. Wolves just wanted to start the season well, and we started out so slowly. And those kind of stats that you've highlighted, obviously quite concerning, especially in terms of shots. I believe that's the second most that we'd ever conceded at home in like 18, 19 years. I think the other one was against Chelsea, which we also won 1-0. So maybe that's a little stat for you. But I think the most concerning stat that I saw was that in terms of the duels during the game. So in terms of the aerial duels we won 7 headers in the game and they won 17. And then in the total duels we won 46 and they won 76. And that just can't happen. It's unforgivable that kind of level of dominance in terms of physicality. It's all well and good having technical players on the pitch who can light up a game and bring in special moments. But if you can't win a ball at a 50-50, what's the point of being on the pitch? You've got a combative game these days. You've got to be able to win a duel against an opponent. And at times it looked like some of the Wolves players were really performing. Like some of those Brazilians were looking like Kaká, running through the midfield. And you're just thinking we let them just dance and walk through, and that's potentially something that we really need to look at and how defensive those 2 number 8s are, because we mentioned Mount starting didn't have the best game. Obviously, you can't really give someone the amount of stick that he's been getting. After one game, it's his first competitive game with a brand new set of teammates, and we're just gonna have to see how that goes. But it was quite concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're all fair points there. I mean, wasn't the best performance, a lot to work on, but it is the first game of the season, and there's a long way to go. I think, especially Mason Mount, all this there seems to be a lot of propaganda online against him already, and quite unfairly from media outlets as well, such as TalkSport. I think he's getting enough stick as it is from not only our fan base, but especially other fan bases. Sure, Chelsea fans are jumping at the bit to highlight how he didn't play that well. But I think it'll be a transition period for him to understand how to play with Bruno. I think that's going to be the key, because there were a couple of performances which were highlighted, and a couple of players that got a lot of stick, Casemiro and Mount especially. But it seemed like a lot of the time Casemiro was left on his own, and Bruno and Mount were kind of pressing quite aggressively at the same time. That left a huge gap in midfield. And there's only so much, Casemiro can do. He's a great football player, but he can't cover, the whole of the center of the park, I think, on his own, which maybe I think Ten Hag thought he could potentially do. Maybe Ten Hag thought, Wolves wouldn't pose such a threat. But you mentioned about, the players in the middle of the park. Me and my mates in our WhatsApp group, we were joking, saying that Cunha was, acting like prime R9 Ronaldo. It's literally just skipping past in the middle of the park, kind of on 3-4 different occasions. Really, the defense didn't know what to do, wasn't really pressing him, and he just made it look so easy. So I think that the kind of key to all of those problems is essentially going to come with Bruno and Mount having a bit more of an understanding. Like, look, we both can't press at the same time. We both can't leave the middle of the park exposed. And, they're both smart players. They're both fantastic players. I think they'll essentially eventually come to an understanding of how best to play. And I mean, we've seen ourselves last season, Bruno playing in a slightly more defensive role, slightly more deeper role. Maybe that might be the case as to how we progress going forward. But I think it was really unfair for both Casemiro and Mount to get such a kind of negative feedback on their performance. There
was a lot of players who didn't deserve positives. A lot of them didn't play well. I was coming out of the ground thinking Wan-Bissaka was probably our best player, and the only one really massively deserving of praise. I don't think Luke Shaw played well at all. The amount of times he got caught, or they had a lot of space down their right-hand side, down our left-hand side, due to Shaw going forward and getting caught out a lot. I don't think Rashford did much at all through the middle. Garnacho, ineffective from the start. Anthony, he was positive. Got into a lot of good positions.
I think that was our major kind of spark really on the right hand side between Wan-Bissaka and Anthony, especially the first half. Those were the only two that looked like they were going to create something really. And you're right, even Rashford, worryingly, looked like Rashford from not last season but from 2 seasons ago. He wasn't really in the game. I think it's quite clear, even from what he said. Sure, I don't know if you picked up on the overlap interview he did with Gary Neville over the summer. I think he quite clearly said that he prefers being on the left. And that's why I think we're really keen to see what Rasmus Højlund brings to the table, focusing purely in the middle of the park as a centre forward and him on the left. But yeah, you're right. I think a massive kind of plus was Wan-Bissaka going forward. Yeah. He looked immense. Anthony was most probably second best. And then the third kind of leads us to Onana. Had a bit of a wobble with the penalty appeal, which could have gone the other way. What did you think overall, not only of that incident, but overall of his Premier League debut?
Yeah, it was solid. I think he made 6 saves, according to the Barclays Fantasy Premier League app, which I'm actually not playing this year. It stresses me out too much. But yeah, my brother plays it religiously, and I was asking him about bonus points and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, he mentioned that Onana got six registered saves, which for any sort of game is good stats for a keeper. You ideally wouldn't want him to have to make 6 saves. You want him to have to make no saves and get a clean sheet. But if you're making saves, you're making saves, and if you're not conceding, we're not losing. His distribution at points, very good. And there were also points where I think on a debut, he just got rid of it when you need to get rid of it. There were points when maybe in pre-season, he potentially was being closed down, would have tried to play a neat little pass or something like that. But on your debut, first game of the season, when, I don't think we were winning at points, he just got rid of the ball and made the right kind of choices. And I was really impressed. He looked commanding in goal. He claimed the ball. He flaps at one. But then there was another one in the last minute when a cross came in, and he just kind of cannonballed out and bowled it out and collected the ball at kind of knee height, which was really nice and brave in the last minute to essentially win us the game, or to keep hold of the 3 points. With regards to the penalty, what were your thoughts before I get into mine? Because I've got a bit of a tirade to go on.
Okay. My honest opinion is it on another day could have gone the other way. I mean, if it was against us, I would have been pretty, a little bit annoyed not to get a penalty, because he did kind of come out. He completely took the player, didn't come close to the ball. I think goalkeepers kind of get away with it a little bit more in situations like that. It was 50-50. It was 50-50. I don't think it was just an absolute stonewall pen. But at the same time, I could see them it being given on another day.
Yeah. I think it was a pen. I think, if you're right, if that happened to Varane at the other end, absolutely, I'd be asking for a penalty. I was asking for a penalty halfway through the second half when Anthony went through and lobbed the keeper and then got absolutely clattered by the keeper. So yeah, I know it's in a very, very different context, but if you look at it on paper, and football isn't played on paper, but if you look at it, the attacker gets to the ball, the keeper doesn't get to the ball, the keeper clatters into the player, and nothing comes of the chance. They're mirror images, and Anthony goes and gets clattered by Sarr, nothing happens because he's lobbed the ball over him and it's got cleared off the line. Fair enough. Their defender has gone and their attacker's gone and headed the ball. Onana's missed it, clattered the guy, and Sky is still talking about it. So, I think there's a lot to be said on agendas against United. And one thing that I will say is there's been some quotes from Dermot Gallagher on Sky Sports News talking about the VAR and everything like that. So last year, the Wolves keeper did the same kind of challenge on a Leeds player, which wasn't given. And I'm sure you've seen like kind of clips of that on Twitter in the last couple of days. But Dermot Gallagher actually came out and said after that instance that this is a typical goalkeeper's challenge that never gets penalised. People ask me why it's not a pen, but it never has been a pen. If a ref gives a pen for that next week, there'd be an uproar. So that was last season, what Dermot Gallagher said. And then this season, after this game, he's come out and said, it's got to be a pen. It has to be a foul. VAR should have overturned it. So this is the same guy within 6 months saying two completely different things in the exact same situation. And it's just, if there was consistency in the game with every decision being the same decision, or the same result from the same instance, then it'd be, a much cleaner kind of discourse before and after the game. So, there's so much talked about because it's United. I really do think that if this was, Crystal Palace's keeper swiping at a West Ham defender, who cares? It just doesn't matter. It's because it's Onana on his debut, and there's absolutely no need to still be talking about it. Like, England women have just qualified for the World Cup final, and Sky are still talking about it on Sky Sports News. This Onana, like, what's the point?
I know.
That's what's outrage.
No, all valid points. Gobar said, good to see you both back on the pod. Thank you for tuning back in, and good to be back. Nice to be, talking all things United again. But yeah, going back to that Onana point and just generally the United agenda, it is pretty tiring. Like, just little things now that, there's some pictures going around on Twitter because Howard Webb was at the game on the weekend and he was in hospitality. I mean, what referee, ex-referee or whatever capacity he's in now, goes to any football club and, pays for a ticket to sit with the rest of the crowd? It just doesn't happen. But just because United have had that decision go their way, all these other side, silly bits of information, pictures, whatever you want to call it, are getting picked up, and it's just getting a bit boring, the whole kind of United agenda. Yeah, which
on day one of the season.
yeah, exactly. No, it's just boring because we've always had to deal with it. Yeah. But that's what happens. Even though we haven't won a Premier League title for 10 years, people still have this against us, and it just goes to show how big of a football club we are. And I think it's just because people are concerned that if we do start building some momentum and become competitive again, that we'll be in a position to kind of take over. And that's why that agenda is there. But going back to the Onana performance in general, I was really pleased with it. You're right, he made 6 saves. I've got him in the Fantasy Premier League as well. You get a point for every 3 saves. Yeah. And he had like 5 with about 5 minutes to go. And it's one of those. It's like, can someone just give him a little shot to save, like a soft one, nothing too intense, so I'll get my extra point. So yeah, he made those 6 saves. Looked fairly solid. Yeah, that one incident wasn't great, but in the grand scheme of things, it shouldn't be the one topic that we're all talking about, because he had such a good performance. Distribution was great. Such a big difference from De Gea when it comes to playing from the back, and you can tell how comfortable he is on the ball.
There was one ball out to Garnacho in the first half.
I was just about to say that one. He pinged it like prime Paul Scholes, out to the left, and it went straight to Garnacho's feet. So I think overall, fantastic performance, a lot more to come from him, and it's a huge plus. I mean, at the end of last season, Ten Hag did an interview about how football has changed and how we need to build from the back. And Onana, I think, it is definitely gonna help us do that. You mentioned Garnacho, again, another player to come under quite a bit of fire after that performance on Monday night. What do you think overall of how he played? I know it wasn't the best. Would you stick with him going forward, starting against Tottenham, or do you think potentially he could get dropped for Sancho? Sancho played as a false 9 in a couple of games in pre-season. Do you think Ten Hag could swing that way for the Tottenham game?
I think he could do, considering that we didn't play massively well the other day. I thought Garnacho he got the ball a lot, and he's a very good out ball, and will consistently be. But I don't think he's a starter just yet. There was a point when it came in the second half when I was like, I'd love fresh Garnacho on right now. Yeah. I'd love Garnacho off the bench at this point. Playing for the last 60 minutes. So Chirag, thank you for your point. He's not a starter. Another season being an impact sub. I agree. I don't think he's ready quite yet, but in 3 or 4 months, who's to know? His trajectory has been, very, very clean and very upward. And if it keeps carrying on the way that it has carried on, then who's to say at Christmas he's not starting or at least getting a lot more starts and rotation. But I think Sancho was positive when he came on. I think he got into a lot of good areas. He did play off the left rather than going on to coming into a false nine, centre forward, and Rashford onto the left. So I think that if he's going to start Sancho against Tottenham, then I think Sancho will start on the left and Rashford up front, just because I think Rashford is still probably more effective up front than Sancho. But who's to know?
Saying that though, he did score a really good goal against Arsenal pre-season. I don't know if you saw that. When he started as a false nine.
He actually looked quite quick, actually, didn't he? In that goal, he got the ball and he accelerated away quite well. So maybe he's been working on it. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think everyone has to agree about Sancho. This season is make or break for him. He has to perform. If not, surely he'll be out the door come next June, July time. It was quite interesting that he did play in that false nine position in pre-season. Interesting in that it gives us an extra kind of, bow in our arrow as such, going forward, if he can be that versatile and play in the middle, like we mentioned before. I think Rashford does prefer playing on the left.
Yeah.
Once Højlund is fit and ready to go, I don't think Garnacho is a starter either. It's going to be Rashford, Højlund, Antony, week in, week out. And
he's a brilliant option off the bench. So he's 18 years old or 19 years old this season. So he doesn't deserve to be starting every week in, week out just yet. He's not got the stats, and he's not bringing in the match ratings, or like, say, if you give an eye test 8 out of 10, he's not bringing in 8 out of 10s every game, especially when he starts. So, maybe a lot of cup starts and in the Champions League against some weaker clubs, absolutely. But in the Premier League, maybe not so much just yet.
Yeah, I mean, and you make a valid point. He's only 18 years old, which I don't think deserves the amount of stick sometimes he gets when he has a bad game. Kind of saw it a couple of times last season as well, where he didn't have the best of games and was getting a lot of stick on social media, which I think is pretty unnecessary. Don't think it will have an impact on him, though. He seems to have, his head screwed onto his shoulders, pretty strong-minded, and I don't think he'll let all of that get to him. But yeah, absolutely. I think his role in the team, definitely for the first part of this season, is to come on as an impact sub. I mean, we saw it in the FA Cup final as well. He was a breath of fresh air when he came on and nearly got a equaliser for us. But now going forward, I'm super excited to see Højlund play. We desperately need to get him fit. I don't know how long he might be out for. Do you have any idea at all on that one? Have you heard anything in the media as to when he might return and make his debut?
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere that they're trying to aim for the Arsenal game for him to come in, but I'm not sure if that's going to be from the start or from off the bench. It just depends. It's quite a serious concern, I believe, that there's signs of a potential stress fracture if he carries on playing with the intensity that he has been before. It's just typical, isn't it? You know, you're looking for a striker who you can rely upon game after game, and then as soon as he comes in, you're like, oh, actually, he might break his back in 2 weeks.
I was talking to my mates about this. I didn't really understand how he could pass a medical and then be injured. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's not massively serious, then happy days. You know, we'd be really looking forward to getting him in as soon as possible. I think a lot of the praise that he gets is from his off the ball running, be that in or out of possession. Sorry, being that attacking or defensively. I think he presses quite well. His work rate is quite high, and some of the runs that he makes off the ball could be quite promising for the creative players that we've got behind. So maybe if we're looking at Mount and Bruno, they might have a lot of fun this season trying to feed those kind of runs that Højlund makes, but maybe Rashford doesn't quite make those clever runs, and it's just one of those. But yeah, talking of injuries with Jurriën Timber at Arsenal, that's
exactly
for him, isn't it? You know, getting signed for £40 million and then doing your ACL on day one, he's out for the season.
They say he's out for the whole season. I mean, I was just about to say, God forbid we're in a situation like that with Højlund, and you know he's got a long-term injury and can't play for us for the majority of the year. Arsenal, I think they'll get away with it. I mean, Timber's a great player, but they have defensive options. You know, so I don't think it's as bad. But for us, we desperately need Højlund to play and hit the ground running kind of ASAP. But at least that was refreshing from us this season in terms of signings. You know, not leaving it till deadline day and kind of buying players as and when they were available, and overall doing some pretty good business. I don't think we overpaid. Maybe for Højlund, time will tell. But I think Mount and Onana were definitely really good buys in the end.
Yeah, I think definitely with Onana, a really good transformative signing, someone who's going to make us a hell of a lot better, is worth the money. With Mount, his market value and how well he comes up in the squad, who knows? He's 24. He's a regular England international. Starts. He's easily a top 4 player. If he fits the system, time will tell. One thing I did see, and it's fantastic to see with hindsight, but you know, Newcastle got Sandro Tonali for 50 million, and we got Mount for 55. Tonali came in and had an absolute stormer the other day. I'm not sure if you watched the Newcastle, but what a player he looks. Begs the question, why weren't we looking at someone like that? Who knows? I know Newcastle have got the ex-Brighton chief scout, haven't they, or director of football? So maybe they're going to start unearthing a lot of gems off the conveyor belt like Brighton have been doing. And that'd be a worry considering how much money they've got.
You never know; they might just be using Football Manager.
It looks like it. Really right? Some of these people that Brighton are getting or looking like they're getting, you see on Football Manager or FIFA, and you're just like, no one's going to watch these games, are they? And finding these people, they're going on Football Manager. They're looking at the potentials, and then they're going to go and scout them. I think the transfer fees really fair, and as you say, if Højlund turns into a superstar, then that 60 million is going to look an absolute steal.
Any more potential transfers coming in or going out? I guess before we get into that, Maguire's deal unfortunately seems to be off with West Ham. It sounds like negotiations have broken down, and from what Fabrizio Romano is saying, Maguire wasn't that interested in the first place. I guess why would he if he is going to get a pay bump because we're in the Champions League? But where do you think that leaves Maguire? Because I personally think he's a 5th choice centre back and doesn't really add too much to the squad. No longer captain. He just seems to be a bit of a loose end at United.
Yeah, big time. He's got 2 years left on his contract. at 190 grand a week, I think. So I did a little bit. I'm rubbish at maths, but I went on my calculator earlier, and I looked at kind of the wages that West Ham are rumoured to be wanting Maguire at was I believe £100,000. And if he's on 190 at United now, if there's 2 years of a £90,000 loss in wages, it comes out at like £9 million. So you know, why would you give up £9 million? And I know it's because he's going to England and wants to play for England. But I'd be wanting to. I would be wanting the money. I'd be wanting the money, of course. But I think if we're willing to supplement those wages, then it's a no-brainer. You're starting every game.
It's a concept that I just don't understand. I've never come across this before, where a player needs to be paid to leave the football club. Like I've just never seen it ever before. Like
I think it's just having the wages subsidised. I think is quite common. If you're a player at a top club who is on 200 grand a week and you're going to a mid-tier club for 100 grand and you've got 3 years left on your contract, then who in their right mind would leave and get a pay cut?
Yeah, I know, but I've just never heard of it. I mean, I'm sure there must be transfers in the history of football that have happened where players have had to take a pay cut. But again, whether it's just a United thing or a Maguire thing,
it might just be the amount, like the amount of difference. £90,000 a week. It's you're halving your wages. Maybe if it was like if West Ham were offering 170, it might not be too much of a difference. But if I'm on 50 grand a year, for example, in my job, and I go and someone else wants me for 25 grand, I'm obviously not.
Yeah, you're not going to take it.
So that's. And you look at it in those kind of terms, it's obviously not that black and white, but at the same time, if he wants to be playing for England in the next Euros, you need to be starting. And coming in at United off the bench, 1 in 5 games, or you might start in the Carabao Cup, or you might start against Luton if Varane's had a couple of games in a row and Lindelof's got a knock. Luke Shaw can play at left back, and he plays fantastically at centre back. So, Carson, thank you for your comment, saying I'd say maybe even 6th choice for Shaw getting the nod at centre back before him. Yeah, I agree. There were games last season when it was Lindelof and Shaw playing at centre back, with Malacia on the left, and that's a big option. If you're coming up against some quick and mobile strikers, then Luke Shaw and Lindelof are the way to go as a centre back pairing. Harry Maguire is not. If you're up against a team who are going to be lumping the ball up to Wout Weghorst, then maybe he's your man. But the amount of teams in the Premier League,
mention his name again on this podcast.
Go away. But yeah, Harry Maguire, it's a really difficult one because there's a lot of talk against him, and this was last season when he was still playing for United. There was no rumours about him leaving. There was no bids accepted for him by United, and if he's rejected this West Ham offer to stay at United to be 4th choice with United, if he knows that United need to sell to buy, then as well as holding us back on the pitch, he's actually holding us back off the pitch. Yeah. So, if we want to be signing a new centre-back who's young, who's hungry, who's quick, who's strong, some of the names being Pavard, maybe not so young, but he's very experienced, Todibo, who's, all of those things. And then there's a guy from Germany, Tapsoba, as well, young, quick, strong, dynamic. They're not going to get any of those players without selling Maguire. So having Harry Maguire in there, it's holding us back in the transfer market, and it's a shame.
Yeah. Wayne, thanks for tuning in. I'm sure you guys know Wayne Barton, the kind gent who heads up Talking Devils. Added a nice little comment there. Sanchez had to have a similar payoff because of his wages. fair point. Most probably did. Just seems to be not great business on our part. Again, I saw a stat today over the last 5 seasons in terms of net spend. We're top of the pile, negative 700 million, purely because I think we're just a terrible selling club, and unfortunately,
I actually think we're second now after Chelsea. After Chelsea's last couple of days.
Oh yeah, that's true. Maybe that was from a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Even still, just I think historically we've just not been a great selling club. Just briefly as well, before we move on, you're talking about centre backs and pairings, etc. Martinez obviously got subbed off. Do you think that was purely because he had a yellow card, or do you think it was more performance related?
Well, I think Varane actually came out after the game and said that he had like a slight knock on his ankle. If that's a smokescreen, fair enough. If he's on a yellow card, I think it might have been because he's on a yellow card. It was a pretty rash tackle in the first half. It was one of those where I actually thought he would have got that ball, but I guess Neto, the Wolves player, he's quick. He's a very quick player, and he just got there first. But I think it was a bit silly. I think it was 17 minutes in, and you're making a tackle like that, knowing now that the refs are giving yellow cards left, right, and centre. I think their left back in the game, Ait Nouri, was booked for having the ball for a throw-in for like 6 seconds. So, if he goes and takes a throw-in at 35 minutes and he's holding onto the ball, he's getting a second yellow and a red card. So I think with that amount of the game yet left to play, I think it was quite a smart move.
I think Ten Hag's pretty conscious of suspensions, especially after last season.
Yeah. Well, there was a point in the first half where they broke through the middle, and Martinez, every game, would have taken a yellow card for a tackle if he hadn't been booked. But he'd been booked. They just walked straight through him and got a really good 3-on-2 chance, which didn't come of it. Like nothing came of it, but it was in the centre spot, and it was a really, really bad chance for us to concede that just because he's on a yellow card. And if that happened again, then who knows what would have happened. So bringing Lindelof on was probably the best option for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And he seemed relatively sound. There were a couple of points where the defence in general was exposed, but I wouldn't point fingers specifically at Lindelof. I thought he was pretty solid and did his job pretty well. Right, finally then, before we say goodbye, moving forward on to Tottenham on the weekend. It's a Saturday, and one thing we learned from last season is we don't lose on Saturdays. So, what do you think? Obviously, a lot of change at Tottenham as well. New manager, new captain in Son. Obviously, Harry Kane's no longer at the club. They drew against Brentford on the weekend, so they're most probably looking for a kind of response first home game of the season for them. What do you think we have in terms of chances of winning that game? What do you think the result will be?
Yeah, I think we've got a good chance. I think the game might actually come down to midfield again. Their midfield, because I watched the game. I watched the Spurs game the other day, and it seemed quite a porous midfield from the Spurs side. So I think Brentford got in and created a fair few chances on a counter, and I think that's how both of their goals came about. They didn't look massively strong, Tottenham. They're playing a new formation with a new manager, and they've probably been training on it throughout pre-season, but who knows how that's going to transfer over to a performance against a big team. You could say the same for us. We're playing a similar kind of tactic. I'd probably say maybe a little bit more attacking, considering how many chances we conceded the other day. But I imagine that throughout this week, Ten Hag has been really nailing into those players. You've got to get back. No more than 5 players forward at a time. We can't leave Casemiro on his own in the midfield. And if we do, then your centre back or one of your fullbacks has got to drop in and help him out, because there were so many times when they just came straight through the middle of the park and really exposed us. So I think we've got a good chance. The Tottenham goals both came from defenders. So James Maddison's got a really good free kick, a really good set piece in him. So you've always got to be wary of that. But attacking, they didn't really create too much. I don't think Richarlison did too much. Son again and Kulusevski, who knows in that kind of front three. They're all great players. They can all produce, but so far not really seen too much. But yeah, it'll be a tough game. I'm actually in London. I'm not going to the game, but I'll be down in London for. I'll be watching it in the pub. I'm going to a punk rock concert with my dad on Saturday. So I'll be around. Hopefully there'll be a few Reds in the pub with us. Hopefully it's not a lot of Tottenham fans.
Nice. Yeah, I think, look, Tottenham are going to take a bit of time to plug that Harry Kane kind of gap. Him and Son have been rampant for the last few seasons, kicked up such a strong partnership. It's going to take a while for the front 2-3 to connect and start scoring goals. So I think it's a good time to play Tottenham whilst they're in transition, finding their new feet with the manager. In terms of tactics, I think potentially Ten Hag, will he make some changes? I'm not sure. I think the kind of glaring one would be Garnacho, dropping him potentially for Sancho. I would even go out on a whim and potentially put Mount on the bench for Eriksen, purely again because they are very quick on the counter attack, and unless he's kind of drilled into them in training this week that they can't leave Casemiro as exposed as they did against Wolves, we could potentially get caught quite quickly on the counter attack. And just with Eriksen and Bruno, it just gives a little bit more balance, personally. But I don't think he'll go that route. I think
it's a game for Fred, wouldn't you?
No, I wouldn't go that desperate in terms of having defensive cover. Not Fred, but potentially Eriksen. I don't know. I think he might just bring a bit of balance to the game, whilst again Bruno and Mount find that kind of balance in the middle of the park. But again, like I said, personally, I think Ten Hag will stick to the same team that he went with on Monday, bar Garnacho, and keep him as an impact sub.
What would you think about putting either Bruno or Mount on the left?
That's another good shout. It's actually one point I wanted to mention earlier. I mean, Mount used to play in the top three quite regularly at Chelsea. Just adds another bit of versatility. I don't think Bruno is as effective on the left, to be honest. I think his attributes just get lost there. He's not particularly quick. He doesn't have the impact in the game. I think Mount is worth giving a go at least. Whether he should wait for dare I say, a slightly lesser opposition. But I think it's something we should definitely try, definitely before Willian comes back anyway. If we're not being effective with Garnacho or Sancho, I think it is definitely an option.
Yeah, well, we've got Forest at home next weekend, haven't we? So that could be a good option to, try and experiment a little bit.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's it, guys. I think for this week, covered all the main points. Thank you for everyone who joined in, left a question. As mentioned before, if you guys are listening back on the podcast platforms, please subscribe. The more the merrier. And we'll be back next week. I think, Steve, will you be with us, or are you away?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be away. I'll be here next Monday.
Yeah, so Steve will be back, and hopefully we'll be covering everything to do with the Spurs game and lots more. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon.